In the spring of 1942, as fertilizer factories were converted to explosives plants and imports collapsed, British food planners faced a crisis few modern gardeners can imagine. Nitrogen, the foundation of crop growth, was suddenly unobtainable. There were no bags to buy, no deliveries to wait for, and no margin for failure. Yet food production had to rise, not fall. Victory gardens were expected to feed cities. The solution that emerged was not new technology, it was old biology, and it worked so well that it later vanished from public memory. White clover, Trifolium repens, was not introduced during the war. It had been part of European agriculture for centuries. What changed in 1942 was how deliberately it was used. Gardeners were instructed to sow clover directly between vegetables, not as a crop of its own, but as a permanent living layer. A Welsh gardener named Thomas Edwards kept meticulous notes that still survive in agricultural archives. He planted white clover between vegetable rows in March 1942 on soil that had already been exhausted by years of cultivation. By autumn, nitrogen tests showed levels had doubled. By the following spring, they had tripled. He did not apply fertilizer once. What happened underground mattered more than what was visible above it. Clover roots host rhizobium bacteria in small nodules. These bacteria, convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available forms continuously. The process requires no fuel, no factories, and no human intervention beyond planting. Wartime agricultural surveys measured nitrogen fixation rates between 150 and 300 pounds per acre per year, depending on conditions. Most vegetable plots required less than half that. Excess nitrogen accumulated in the soil, improving future seasons, rather than being lost. Unlike chemical fertilizer, which releases nitrogen all at once and often washes away, clover releases nitrogen gradually as roots die and regenerate. The timing matches plant growth cycles naturally. Seedlings receive modest amounts. Heavy feeders receive more as the season progresses. Edwards' yields reflected this. Tomato production increased by over 40% in the first year. By the third year, yields had nearly doubled compared to pre-clover harvests. He replanted nothing. The clover returned every spring on its own. The benefits extended beyond fertility. Clover's dense ground cover suppressed weeds, reducing labour dramatically. Its shallow canopy shaded soil, cutting evaporation and lowering water demand. As roots died and regrew, they created channels that improved drainage and aeration. Earthworm populations surged. Organic matter increased annually instead of declining. Wartime researchers documented that clover-based gardens improved soil structure year after year, while chemically fertilized plots slowly degraded even with continued inputs. By 1944, white clover was present in the majority of British Victory gardens. It worked reliably across climates, soil types, and garden sizes. When the war ended, logic suggested white clover would become standard practice. Instead, it disappeared from post-war gardening guides. Agricultural extension publications stopped mentioning it. Seed catalogues quietly removed it. University research funding shifted sharply toward synthetic fertilizer studies. This shift coincided with the conversion of explosives factories into fertilizer plants. The same Haber-Bosch infrastructure that produced wartime munitions now needed peacetime markets. A recurring purchase model replaced a one-time planting solution. White clover posed a problem. You cannot sell fertilizer to people who grow their own nitrogen indefinitely. You cannot create annual dependency when fertility regenerates itself. No ban was issued, no controversy announced. The method was simply omitted until it faded from common practice. The wartime data was never disproven. It was archived. Later, researchers rediscovered the same results independently in the 1980s and 1990s under the banner of regenerative agriculture. The numbers matched almost exactly. Biological nitrogen fixation proved more stable, less polluting, and more durable than chemical inputs. Over time, fields improved instead of declining. Fertilizer dependency, well, it disappeared within just a few seasons. The irony is that white clover never stopped growing. It persists in lawns, fields and roadsides across temperate regions. And, it is routinely sprayed as a weed, then replaced with purchased nitrogen. The wartime method requires no modern adaptation. Clover seed is broadcast thinly on soil in early spring or fall. It is not buried deeply. Moisture is maintained for about 2 weeks. Once established, it persists for decades. In gardens, clover is planted between crops and trimmed back when necessary. Cuttings are left as mulch. Roots remain alive and active underground. Fertilizer becomes unnecessary. So, in lawns, clover is overseeded into the existing grass. Within, 2 seasons, nitrogen needs drop by as much as 90%. Water requirements fall too. And the lawn, well, it stays green even during drought. This is exactly how it was done during World War II. White clover was not erased because it failed. It was erased because it worked permanently. It undermined a system built on annual purchases and controlled supply. Thomas Edwards planted clover once in 1942 and never bought fertilizer again for the rest of his life. His garden fed his family through war and peace alike. If this kind of forgotten wartime knowledge matters to you, subscribe to the Wartime Frontlines and share this with someone who still believes fertilizer must come in bags. History holds more answers than modern industry once remembered.